Well, that's the whole point, innit? I'm Callum Nolan. I'm 29 years old. I know I look more like 39, but that's what 10 years of Tory rule will do to you. Yeah, I'm a typical lefter, blaming all my problems on the Tory government. It's not that I blame them for everything. I just can't stand everything about them. It's not just austerity, millions of kids in poverty, cuts to benefits, attacking the disabled, the bedroom tax, our average lifespan declining for the first time ever, selling off the NHS, treating our doctors and nurses like shit, the lack of teachers, 350 million quid a week on the side of a bus, their handling of Brexit, the xenophobia, the homophobia, all the phobias, or even thinking that running through fields of wheat is naughty. It's not just that. It's the fact that currently, this Tory government, right now, as we speak, dragging us into an Orwellian dystopian nightmare of double think and double speak and confusion. The People's Assembly have been trying to make sense of the crisis. We shouldn't have to do that. It's the job of the government to make sense of the crisis. But mixed messages, outright lying, misinformation, bending test figures, R rate, infection rate, deaths, hospital deaths, care home deaths, deaths at home, tests carried out, tests sent out, bell curve, flatten the curve, fatten the curve. All makes it so infuriating when you look at it in simple terms, which is that us, the UK, the good guys, the ones that you get taught at school, that do all the baddies in and win all the wars. Our little island, we have the highest COVID death rate per million in the world. Our little island. But still, get out and clap for the frontline workers, all of you. I mean, seeing Boris Johnson and Rishi Shuri clap for the NHS is nearly as disgustingly ironic as John Terry and Luis Suarez sharing a Blackout Tuesday post on Insta. That actually happened. Welcome to 1984, my fellow millennials, where all roads lead to Trumpian America. America, the special relationship, the land of the free. To quote Bill Hicks, it's not that I disagree with Trump's economic policy or his foreign policy. It's that I believe that he's the child of Satan sent here to destroy planet Earth. He's literally destroying planet Earth. If only Bill Hicks were around today. And as if the stuff that's going on around us and across the pond isn't exasperating enough, we've got people telling us that all lives matter all over social media. Sorry? Were you saying all lives matter before you heard someone say Black Lives Matter? No, you wasn't. Unfortunately, it's not as obvious to some, like Officer Derek Chauvin, that all lives matter. So keep saying it. Keep saying it. Keep saying it. Yeah, good old USA and the UK. Land of the free, home of the truth. Sod this, I fancy a pint. I'm going to go and tell all the pubs they can open so I can go for a pint. I proper fancy it. One rule for them. Justice for George Floyd.
My name is Shiva Lucca, and I want to thank the People's Assembly for letting young people express our anger, because there is so much to be angry about. I am angry that George Floyd was murdered by the police and in the sadistic way that he was. I am angry that he wasn't the first and he won't be the last. We remember Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner and Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland and so many more. I am angry that those protesting have been beaten and tear gassed and shot. They've been arrested and injured. They've lost their eyes. They've lost their lives. They want to talk about rioting. It is the police that are rioting. I'm angry that American billionaires have made $434 billion in the last 3 months, while over 40 million Americans have lost their jobs, and the media want to talk about protesters looting. I'm angry that Boris Johnson had the audacity to say yesterday that Black Lives Matter, after the racist things that he said, after being in a government that has implemented cuts that have hit Black and brown people the hardest, a government that has left Black and brown people to burn in Grenfell, that has deported Windrush citizens, and after all the Black people that have been killed by British police. His handling of this pandemic has cost at least 50,000 lives, disproportionately Black and ethnic minority people, and his lifting of the lockdown to protect the economy will cost more. But I also know that our anger can be channeled into fighting for change. I see the protesters, I see the white people that stood in front of Black people to protect them, that stood in front of Muslims so they could pray, the bus drivers that refused to let the police transport arrested protesters, the nurses that leave their long shifts to go and treat injured protesters, the tube drivers here in London that stuck Black Lives Matter on their trains, and the firefighters that kneeled yesterday. Our anger can and must be the starting point of our working class, multiracial, international solidarity that can bring this system down. Thank you.
I am Zoe Plummer. More people sleeping rough each time you walk through town. That's political. Your cousin who's a nurse hasn't had a pay rise in a decade and is using food banks to feed her family. That's political. Rich people getting tested for coronavirus whilst frontline workers aren't even given basic protective equipment. That's political. Our elderly dying without dignity in a care sector the state has rid itself of responsibility of. That's political. Your kids' school's got bigger classes each year and is having to do whip-arounds to pay for books. That's political. 11,000 less doctors, 40,000 less nurses, 17,000 less hospital beds. The NHS in turmoil. That's political. Windrush citizens deported after living in this country for their whole life. People saying immigrants just come here and steal our jobs after our government drives around buses that say go home and labels them unskilled workers. That's political. Then those same immigrants keeping our hospitals open, saving our lives during this pandemic and dying disproportionately, now suddenly rebranded as key workers, called heroes and clapped for week after week. That's political. A bullshit token report into COVID-19 BAME deaths with no recommendations on how to tackle systemic racism. That's political. The newspapers printing an update on a 13-year-old hunt for a missing white child on their front pages today, instead of the biggest protest against racism the world has seen in decades. That's political. A whitewashed education syllabus that erases our shameful colonial history and ignores the vast cultural contributions of people of colour. That's political. Reopening schools before it's safe to do so big businesses can start making money again. Repeatedly saying there's no magic money tree whilst being the sixth richest country in the world and offering tax breaks to the super rich. That's political. Selling arms to fuel wars and dropping bombs killing innocent people in countries halfway around the world from ours. That's political. Meanwhile, we're told to stop being political as hundreds of excess deaths continue every day. Ignoring politics is a privilege. Refusing to engage in politics is in itself a political position, and one that inherently supports injustice. Of course, this government want us to believe we're all in this together. It's because then they can fly under the radar, avoid scrutiny, and do whatever they please. But we're not. This pandemic has shed light on the grotesque inequalities entrenched in our society, which are perpetuated every single day by purposeful, calculated decisions taken by our government. It's our job as activists to stand up and say no more. No more one rule for them and another for everyone else. No more state violence. No more pretending people dying because of austerity is necessary and not in fact a political decision. Yes, we're angry, we're furious, and we demand change right now. Change has never been won through the benevolence of the privileged, but through the struggle, resistance, and sacrifice of those marginalized. Solidarity with all the protesters around the world right now.
Marilia here from the Northeast. I would like to say thank you to People's Assembly for having me on at short notice. This is very much at the last moment and the last day, and a lot of power to you all and fantastic speeches so far. I'm just going to speak straight from the heart. I'm the founder of Come Together NE in the Northeast, a grassroots movement supporting artists of all forms in many other moments. I would like to say this current situation is social cleansing by the Tory government. This is systematic, almost genocidal action, where they are allowing the poor, the disabled and the most vulnerable to go out of their houses and meet in groups, although they know a second wave is coming. It is shameful. It is something that those who do not know better, who will follow government guidelines, will listen to, and their lives will be put in huge risk and death will come. And again, this is a classic example of profits before livelihoods across the northeastern country. I would say this initiative to get young people to speak is absolutely amazing, because we need more young leaders and voices coming up. And by leaders, I mean everybody can be a leader. If you're watching this tonight, don't feel that your voice can't be heard. You aren't good enough. You aren't articulate enough. Myself, in terms of public speaking, I have struggled for many years, but now what I've got is the confidence and the empowerment to start this through. I'd like to say as well, all of my love, strength and positive thoughts to all the Black protesters currently involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. We will get justice for George Floyd. And again, there's many ways that can occur. So please donate what you can to various trusts that are doing amazing initiatives, especially the George Floyd Trust. In terms of how we can mobilise this movement, I would encourage everybody to continue to support People's Assembly, many other organisations. In terms of myself, I'm involved in Newcastle Counterfire, some Stand Up to Race activity going on, and there's many ways your voice can be channelled. So feel free to connect with myself at Come Together NA and listen to all these amazing, inspiring young speakers. We've got such a breadth of talent here that is booming across the country. And again, I'd like to really say that the North East needs to be heard. I'd like to express full solidarity with our Mayor, Jamie Driscoll, and everybody else in the team who are working for better rights for everybody, no matter where you're from, your race, your gender, your age, your status, your past. We can have a bigger future, and the Tories are killing us all by their words, their lack of action. So thank you very much. Love, strength, peace, and all the best to my Black brothers and sisters worldwide. Good night.
We saw from the, hi, my name is Mohammed Sahil, by the way. We saw from the recent report into coronavirus deaths that BAME people are by far most likely to be affected by the disease and most likely to die from it. There is therefore an important question we have to ask of ourselves. How are BAME people seen and treated in the United Kingdom? Why is it that they're more likely to die? And why is it that the government has not yet come up with any sort of policy aimed at preventing the vastly disproportionate number of deaths in this community? BAME people are disproportionately likely to live in poverty, and the effects of coronavirus have meant that not going to work has just not been an option for many people in this community. The worst affected jobs, such as those working on the front line of the NHS, such as doctors and nurses, or even taxi drivers, have large numbers of BAME people working in those sectors. It's no coincidence that the jobs in which BAME people often work in are low paid, with workers finding themselves with little choice but to go to work to be able to afford to pay their rents or their mortgages or feed their families. The government furlough scheme, while it has been helpful for many, has not been enough for people who already only earn barely enough to get by. The BAME community has been suffering for many years, not only during this pandemic, but at the hands of a government who see their lives as expendable. Poverty, low wages, awful living standards in these communities is the Conservative Party not important enough of an issue to be a pressing concern. And now, in a pandemic which has exposed the dire straits that our NHS is in, it's also exposed the lack of concern that the lives of working class BAME people are given in the United Kingdom. We have to move forward from this. We have to be proposing plans to tackle this inequality. If the government won't do it, which they won't, we as a movement, as comrades, have to be willing to raise our voices, whatever community we're from. We can see examples of this, as people have spoken about before, in the extraordinary Black Lives Matter movement, which has continually shone a light on the vast structural inequalities that Black people face, not only in the United States, but here in the United Kingdom as well. And we know the dangers that BAME people face when they're at work, even in the middle of a pandemic. Racist attacks are increasing month after month, year after year. When we make these rallying cries for justice for the BAME community, we can't forget the incidents that have happened to people like Belly Majinga, killed after being assaulted and spat on while at work. It's so important that once the lockdown is over, once the virus has been defeated, if it's a vaccine or anything like that, that we do not forget the huge injustices that Black and ethnic minority people have faced, not only throughout this pandemic, but for the decades before at the hands of the Conservative government and beyond. We have to be louder and stronger than ever to begin to expose and try to help to solve the problems of structural racism that plague our system. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Start my video. Yep. Hey everyone, my name is Shanti. Okay, I've got 3 minutes and there are 3 points I want to make. First of all, the Equalities Minister said today that the reason why ethnic minority people are getting coronavirus more than their white counterparts has nothing to do with racial injustice. That is crazy because first of all, what do we know? Black people are 4 times more likely to have coronavirus than their white counterparts. And when I'm watching the news and I'm seeing people discussing this, they're saying it's because they're vitamin D deficient and they have these things wrong with them and they're predisposed to this. Nobody is predisposed. No Black person is predisposed to anything that makes them more vulnerable to coronavirus. This has everything to do with social inequality. What do we know? 12% of Black households experience overcrowding. How are you supposed to self-isolate in an overcrowded household? Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't. 21% of frontline NHS staff are Black and minority ethnic. This is a systematic issue, and we know the government isn't taking it seriously. And when they talk about things like vitamin D and predisposition to certain illnesses, this comes from the school of thought that is eugenics, which essentially says that some people are fitter than others, some people are better than others, and it's been used for a lot of racism in history. It's been used to sterilize people that have mental illness. It was used in Germany in the 1930s when they wanted to euthanize disabled people. It is crazy, and we cannot allow this to run anymore. Second of all, the Metropolitan Police yesterday released a statement to say that they were in solidarity with the protesters and they were in solidarity with people's hurt, and they think there should be accountability. The Metropolitan Police, accountability. Let's not even get into that right now. Let me be honest with you when I say that the Metropolitan Police are an agent of white supremacy. We don't want your statements. We don't even want your solidarity. We don't even believe that you should exist. We need to abolish the police and we need to defund the police. There is no such thing as a good cop. There is no such thing as a bad cop. When institutions and laws uphold anti-Blackness, when those laws criminalize poverty, when those laws support landowners and forcing people out of their homes, we have an issue. As long as these hierarchies exist, there can be no way in which a law enforcement agency will be just. And I'm just saying that for facts. And I don't really care if people feel like we need to diversify policing. If the institution is rotten, then there is no way that you're going to have diverse faces fix it. It just doesn't work like that. Lastly, because I know I'm running out of time and there are a few more points I wanted to make. White people everywhere, if you're listening, if you see this, I need you to pull up, because as much as I get the idea that you want to be like, it's not Black versus white, it's everyone versus racist, that is just not true. And that is you avoiding accountability. We need to understand that conversations about racism are uncomfortable, and they're uncomfortable because they require all white people, not just the ones that you deem racist, all white people to really look at the ways that they are complicit in white supremacy. Every single white person actively benefits from a system in which Black and brown bodies are subjugated. They work on a system, they operate, and they get to exist in a system in which Black and brown people are at the bottom. It's why we have these structures in place. And no one is just, when we talk about white privilege and we talk about people being able to access certain things and live a better life, it's not just it happening to you, it's you actively being involved in a system that allows you to do that. So really start to understand and interrogate those relationships that you have with society and the ways in which you are complicit in white supremacy. It's not a nice conversation to have, but I really, really need you guys to do it. Thank you so much for having me. Mwah, it's been great.
A fantastic speech. I'm Freddy Bailey and I'm a councillor in Preston. I just want to thank the People's Assembly for having me on and letting me preach for 3 minutes on some of my beliefs. Unfortunately for the Tories, they do say that capitalism is bailed out every 10 years by socialism, and I think even the Tories have had to concede that recently, whether it's been the Second World War or even a COVID-19 crisis. That has been absolutely true. And it was right that the Tories had to spend the billions of pounds, and I'm not going to give them any credit for that because they had to do it. It's one of those where if they didn't do it, the economy would have crashed and it would have left them spending even more money later down the line. But it wasn't the fault of the workers of Britain, the COVID-19 crisis. It wasn't the teachers, it wasn't the cleaners, it wasn't the bus drivers, and it wasn't the builders, and it even wasn't the bankers' fault. But the question I want to know from the Tories is who's going to pay that money back, as it's clear they're not going to listen to my ideas. In the past 10 years, the wealthy 1% have increased their wealth by about triple. That's what they estimate. And obviously, people have never been richer than ever before. I mean, yes, just look at the owner of Amazon to realize how much money that they have. You don't need that amount of money. You physically cannot spend it. And all we're asking for is a redistribution of wealth. It means that those incredibly wealthy 1% members of society might have to choose between not having that fifth holiday or their speedboat not having those supreme leather seats, or their Range Rover not having, I don't know, a nice TV in the back of it, their fourth Range Rover. And that is what we want to change. However, the Tories, I think, will disagree with my opinions on this. They already want to hit, after this crisis, the people who've already suffered 10 years of austerity. They want to go after those single parents. They want to go after those so-called benefits grounders, and they want to go after those people with disabilities and those people and those pensioners as well. And that is up to them and how they will do it. But I think we need to fight every breath in our body to try and stop that. I do like to come up with solutions though. And what they should do is they should increase taxes on the wealthiest. They should look at cracking down on tax avoidance, looking at a mansion tax, looking at those billionaire transaction taxes between different banks. They should also stop the bailouts of companies who avoid paying their taxes. And they should look at other solutions as well to actually make society much more fair. They should look at banning 0-hour contracts and giving more rights to the trade union movement. So if a crisis like this happens again, we're more prepared and ordinary people can deal with it better. They should also look at universal basic income. They should also look at the idea of increasing the welfare state and the creation of regional banks that will actually lend to businesses rather than hoard up wealth in tax havens like the 6 big banks do at this moment in time. They need to invest in those free transport and public transport for all people so we can save the environment and we can keep the CO2 levels at reduction like we're seeing now in this lockdown. And we also need to invest within youth people, build youth zones, and we need to invest within education and make sure it's free for all. This is just my wish list, and I think it's something that I'm not really asking for much. All I'm asking for is a fair society where those who can hold that weight on their shoulders, who can pay that little bit extra, they can then give to those who are actually financially struggling and actually struggling to lead their life. I want to thank the People's Assembly for giving me that voice.
Hello, I'm Bonnie. Thank you to the People's Assembly for having me here. I'm the organiser of the Milton Keynes Black Lives Matter protest. I am angry that my life doesn't matter. I'm angry that George Floyd's life didn't matter. I'm angry that Breonna Taylor's life didn't matter. I'm angry that in the most surveilled city in Europe, we still have not seen the face of the man who spat at Freddy Bailey. I'm angry that during a global pandemic where I'm 4 times more likely to die from this virus, I'm having to protest against a system that kills men and women who look like me. I'm facing criticism for breaking the rules by police officers get away with breaking our necks and murdering us in the streets. I'm angry that there is more vocal criticism for my fighting for my right to live as a Black woman and feel safe than there was for frolicking at beaches and Dominic Cummings gallivanting across the country to his castle. I'm angry at hearing that this is not a UK problem when Black people are 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched, 4 times more likely to have excessive force use against us, 2 times more likely to be killed in a police custody, and yet it is not a UK problem. Mark Duggan, Joy Gardner, Rachel Charles, Sherry Bayo, Sean Riggs, Leon Patterson, MD Mohammed, Adair DaCosta, Cynthia Jarrett, Julian Cold, Sarah Reid, Stephen Lawrence, and so many more names that we do not know. We have not forgotten you, and we march for you too. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Johnny Hunter and I'm the General Secretary of the Young Communist League. Tonight I want to talk to you about the criminal negligence of Boris Johnson's Tory government during this COVID-19 pandemic, but more importantly, what we need to do after it ends. According to the government's own dodgy statistics, at least 40,000 people have now died from COVID-19 in Britain, and the majority of those deaths were preventable. The Tories wanted to avoid putting in place any protective measures and to keep the economy functioning normally for as long as possible, all in the interests of protecting private profit and the value of shares in the City of London. Now, Boris Johnson and Britain's ruling class say they want a return to normal as soon as the pandemic ends. I, for one, am not on board with that. Normal for the ruling class is austerity, it's cuts and it's attacks in our communities. For our ruling class, it's recklessly attacking our trade unions and throwing hundreds of thousands of working people onto the scrap heap. Their normal is imperialist wars, NATO bombings, and refugees drowning in the Mediterranean. They think it's normal to squander billions on the Trident nuclear weapons system, while our schools and our NHS crumble for lack of funding. Their normal means racist policing, racial profiling, and cozying up to authoritarian figures like Donald Trump. Britain's billionaires are getting richer each and every day, while over a third of children in this country grow up in poverty. Britain's communists say their normal, their neoliberal capitalism is killing us, and we can't go back to normal and we won't go back to normal. What we need in Britain is a mass movement, a movement based in our communities, our schools, our campuses and our workplaces, a movement that's capable of removing this Thatcherite government of the rich, by the rich and for the rich. The organised working class is always our strength and our hope, whether it's fighting the COVID-19 pandemic or fighting the plague of racism. We send solidarity to our brothers and sisters in the USA that are facing down Trump's police state. We send solidarity to our heroic NHS and frontline workers who are battling this pandemic. Please support the GMBs after the Applause campaign and make sure that these heroes get more than just a clap when this pandemic ends. We also send solidarity to the workers and the trade unions who are fighting to protect jobs and conditions, including Unite and the workers taking on British Airways and fighting for jobs and safety in the North Sea. Thanks to the People's Assembly for organising this excellent event. Please get involved and get active in your area, and let's take the fight to this Tory government. In the words of Fred Hampton, let's fight racism with solidarity. Let's fight capitalism with socialism. Thank you.
Hi, this is maybe like just a bit rambly, so I'm sorry for that. But I'm just angry, well, with a lot of things at the moment, but I wanted to rant mainly about racism within the UK and the media's response to the rioting in America, which is just, I saw a white news reporter basically try and reduce the whole movement of Black Lives Matter down to a hashtag, and which angers me because people of colour and Black people particularly are going to be Black from the day they're born to the day they die. It's not just a trend for them. I'm angry about the fact that a lot of people think it's enough to just post a picture of a black box on their Instagram in order to take action against institutional racism. Yeah, I'm angry that this is being portrayed as an American thing because, like someone else just pointed out, there are so many cases of police killing people in the UK, mainly people of colour, but not just people of colour, but a disproportionate amount. And those cases have just been swept under the rug and not investigated. I'm sorry. I'm angry with the police because I just don't understand. Well, I do understand, but I just feel like the mentality of almost all police people that I come across is just they feel the need to basically bring people of colour down because I think it comes from some sort of insecurity, which is why a lot of people tend to join the police. I'm not saying that all police are bad, they're not, but it seems to be a massive problem where they feel the need to restrain people of colour so much and take their breath away from them, and that does happen in the UK. And I hope that people can do some research about that and educate themselves. And I'm angry that it's being left to people like us to fight all of these fights that everyone has just been talking about. I'm angry that none of these topics have any significance to the people in the government at the moment, who are just all privileged and basically evil. So yeah, thank you for letting me rant about that.
Hi, I'm Izzy. I'm 12 years old. Instead of playing video games and FaceTiming my friends, I'm here on the People's Assembly speaking up for other kids my age. Why? Because I am so angry with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson hasn't got a single thing right. He locked down too late and he didn't even lock down properly. He waited until 104 people had died. Some European countries locked down before they even had a single death, and they are now in a much better position than us. On the day we learned we had the highest death rate in Europe, he gleefully announced reception year 1 and year 6 were going back to school. Not because he's worried about our education, because he wants our parents back to work. 2 kids tested positive for coronavirus in Bradford just days after schools reopened. You know Eton and Harrow, the posh schools? They aren't going back until September. What's the matter, Boris? I'm sorry, are regular kids not posh enough for you? The virus alert level is at level 4, which means transmission is high or rising exponentially. In fact, over the last 2 weeks, the UK has seen more confirmed cases than the 4 worst performing countries put together. with 8,000 new cases every day, and they are trying to do away with the 2-meter rule, which is the only thing stopping the virus from spreading even faster. He's putting the economy before people's lives. Yesterday, a child who was just 12 years old, the same age as me, died of COVID-19. That child didn't have to die if Boris Johnson had just been a responsible. In April, another child, Ismail Mohammed, just 13 years old, died alone. No one was allowed to go to his funeral. Again, all down to Boris's lack of action. All this death could have been prevented. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Caitlin, and I want to talk about mental health and why I think it's political. I think it's absolutely crucial that we begin to restore the link between social inequality, social injustice, and mental health. Despite being one of the richest countries in the world, millions of children live in poverty and go to school hungry every day. And parents have to choose whether to feed their children or feed themselves. This kind of adversity has a direct impact on childhood development. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, one of the largest studies and longest studies ever conducted, has shown that the more adversity you experience throughout your childhood, the more likely you are to have serious physical and mental health problems as an adult. This is a political issue. There is a mass injustice occurring where powerful systems and misleading narratives obscure the link between people suffering, what has happened to them, and the social, economic, political, and cultural context in which they occur. Research has also shown that poverty is the single biggest indicator of psychosis. Every day I work alongside women who have been given the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and the vast majority of these women have been sexually abused. People who have experienced 5 types of trauma or adversity are 198 times more likely to have the experiences commonly referred to as schizophrenia. This is not a coincidence, yet none of these diagnoses reflect the experiences of these people. The abuse of women, poverty, and other forms of adversity are political issues. Recently, the UN Special Rapporteur released a report that identified the determinants of mental health. These include whether an individual has access to safe and non-violent relationships, a good quality of housing, whether people live in poverty and social inequality, education, and whether they're discriminated against. Although these issues may not at first appear to be political, he acknowledged that relationships at every level and throughout the life cycle are shaped by political, cultural, social, and economic factors. These are our human rights. All of these fundamental building blocks of good mental health have been massively affected by more than a decade of Tory austerity. These issues are political and systemic. It's an absolute outrage that the UN report was swept under the carpet by the government. Why is this not informing politics? Why is it that this report and studies like the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study are not informing government policy and forcing them to change their ways? How can we let our government carry on with business as usual, knowing how many children will go on to suffer in the future? Trauma and adversity, particularly early childhood, shapes people for the rest of their lives, and it's about time we began to shape government policy and all the systems with this in mind. We need to do everything in our power to reduce the adversity faced by children all over the country, and we need a trauma-informed government and trauma-informed policies. We have been told that mental health diagnoses are biological, and we have to fix them and get rid of symptoms. But people's emotional difficulties are meaningful. They are indicative of suffering that needs to be acknowledged, stories that need to be told, and healing that needs to happen in systems and in communities. Mental health is a political issue, and it's about time we start treating it that way. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jamal Alahi-Bokus. On the 23rd of March, UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres called for a global ceasefire to allow countries to deal with the coronavirus without facing the chaos and destruction of conflict. He said, "The fury of the virus illustrates the folly of war." Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab backed this statement, saying that the world's attention must be focused on tackling coronavirus. These words have been rendered totally meaningless by the actions of the government. The UK has been the US's key ally in the so-called war on terror for almost 2 decades, bombing and invading Iraq and Afghanistan, carrying out airstrikes on Syria and Libya, and continuing to sell arms to the Saudi government's forces committing war crimes in Yemen. The war on terror is estimated to have killed 1.3 million people. But it was never about dealing with terrorism. It was fueled by toxic capitalist ideology that only aims were to gain control and exploit resources. During the coronavirus pandemic, the UK has continued to bomb Iraq, which has already struggled to deal with the coronavirus as a result of the disruption to healthcare facilities caused by the 2003 invasion and occupation. Weapons sales to Saudi Arabia have not stopped, despite the warning from the head of the UN Refugee Agency that the coronavirus threatens to delete Yemen from maps all over the world. US sanctions continue to oppress the people of Iran, and the government refuses to condemn them. Sales to the US continue despite them being used against protesters in the US. British intervention in the Middle East has killed thousands. The British government has consistently spent £36 billion at least on military per year. £36 billion on tools for death and destruction. £36 billion which could have been spent on health and social care, which instead has been stripped to the bone by austerity. These cuts, combined with the endless catastrophic failures of this government, have led to the UK's appalling, avoidable death toll. Furthermore, the government is still determined to go ahead with the renewal of our nuclear weapons system, Trident, at the cost of £205 billion. The renewal of Trident could pay for the estimated total cost of the crisis twice over. Coming out of the crisis, the government will try and convince us that the only way to pay for the cost of the coronavirus crisis is by more cuts and increased tax for ordinary people. But we will be there to say, no, Boris, no, Rishi, we will not have it. We have had enough of this absurd military spending. We have had enough of the invasions and bombings over and over again, not in our name. We will demand a cut to military spending, and we will demand an ethical foreign policy. Thank you.
Who says that kids should be seen and not heard? I've not planned anything for this outro, to be honest with you. Usually the onus is on the host to kind of go on about how fantastic the speakers were, but we've just had a load of kind of under 30s, you know, some teenagers, some as young as 12, who have just spoken logic. It was logic personified. So share this far and wide. Don't let people who feel like they have to defend racism or Trump just because they voted for the Tories or they supported Trump, shut us down. Don't let them shut us down. Young people watching this, you've got a voice. Start writing. Get in touch with the People's Assembly. If you want to come and speak with us, then do it. That was brilliant. I don't really know what else to say. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Laura Pidcock, Giant of the Movement, is going to be back next week, Thursday, 7 o'clock. Make sure, I know I took the mic before, but make sure you get out at 8 p.m. Clap for the care workers. They're still there. The frontline workers are still at it, still putting themselves on the front line. So get your pots and pans out, clap and scream for them. And like I said, Laura will be back next Thursday at 7 o'clock. I'm going to end with the kind of awful privilege, I suppose, of reading the People's Assembly's statement on what's going on in the US and George Floyd. The People's Assembly activists would like to send solidarity to the people of Minneapolis, protesting after the assassination of George Floyd by a police officer on Monday, while 3 other police officers stood by. The state violence inflicted on Black people by the police is actively being resisted. The grief, anger, and trauma is at boiling point. People are standing up for their brothers and sisters across America, and we see our struggle as a shared struggle. Police violence against Black people and against working class communities exists in the UK too. From Minneapolis to my hometown of Manchester, working class people, Black and white, must unite to overturn a system which has persecution and inequality hardwired into it. Love, people, justice. Rest in power, George Floyd.